Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. We have a wonderful guest today. She's an author. She is also heavily in the industry of television on a global level because she travels between here in the United States and also Mexico and other countries as a consultant for programming. And in her record, she also has a background of also being a writer, producer. It's very extensive. And today we're going to highlight her primarily as an author. And again, she's doing speeches in colleges and she's constantly moving around. So we had a few moments to capture her in Miami, Florida, where she lives primarily. And we're just thrilled to have her. And we're going to be bilingual in this show. So muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros, Anjanette Delgado.
Muchas gracias, Armando. Gracias por invitarme. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here. I know it took a little bit of doing, and I really appreciate your helping me out with my time zones. It was crazy.
Oh, just for the viewers, we kept going on, but it's just like, no, Eastern time, no, Western time, no, Pacific time. And after a while, we lost it somewhere in there. I'm totally at fault.
Oh,
so
please, no.
We captured each other and finally got the right time zone.
Yeah,
so
and we connected.
How do you do it? I mean, being in one moment in Miami, next moment in New York, next moment in, Mexico City. I mean, how do you don't you lose track after a while?
Oh, of course. I lose track all the time. I hate it when people say, well, I don't know, I'm just organized, No, I don't. I think it also helps that my kids are grown, they're in college. And it's just me and my husband and the dog. So I don't want any writer out there to feel like, oh my God, if she can do it, I should be able to do it. No. So you live a little, things kind of fall into place, right? You kind of learn some lessons. So yeah.
One thing I want to point out, just because we're talking and I know you're in Miami, I had the wonderful experience of going into the Sedano supermarket one day in Miami, in Little Havana. It was so awesome. They had loud music and everybody was dancing down the hallways. I always, every time I remember Miami, I always remember that place.
Yeah, Miami is certainly a puzzle. People tell me, are you ever going to set a novel outside of Miami? And trust me, I want to. I travel a lot, so I definitely want to, but somehow I keep coming back to it. And, and right now my third novel, the one that I just finished the draft, a bad draft, I'm still working on it. But it's also in Miami. And so what I had to do was sort of get into the other Miami, the one I think most people don't know about, the one that isn't glamorous, that isn't synonymous with Miami Beach. The underbelly, right? The gray morning of Miami, if you will, to find my story. So it's a thrilling city once you get to understand it a little bit.
Wonderful. If we can sort of take sort of a ship over of time and go back in your life, early life, when did you begin picking up the pen and paper and said, I'm going to write?
I always wrote. My mom taught me how to read when I was 4 years old. And when I was 10, I wrote, and I thought it was a novel. It was probably like 13 pages. But I called it a novel, yeah. I was 10 years old, and it was called California Girl. And it was about this girl whose parents were going through a divorce. I've been looking for that, and apparently it's been lost. But I submitted it to a contest, and of course it didn't win. But I think I was thinking about it, and then something happens as you grow up a little. You start thinking, you start listening to the voices of, you're never going to be able to make a living as a writer, which is the truth, but that shouldn't deter you, right? And so I became a journalist instead. And so I wrote as a journalist for a living for a long time. I studied journalism and television in my late teens and early 20s, and then just never stopped writing. But it was 1999 when I picked up my pen again to write a novel with the intention, for what I was going to write, that it would turn out to be a full novel. So
I want you to highlight your books, please. If you
yeah, sure. Please. I love my books. So this is, I don't know if you can see it good, but this is The Heartbreak Pill. Mm-hmm. And it was published by Simon & Schuster. My fellow comadre, Johanna Castillo, was my editor, the first person who believed, that I could do this. So I thank her. She published it in English and in Spanish, La Píldora del Mal Amor.
Wow.
This book won some awards, the Latino Literacy Award, and it won, Best Book. I'm sorry, those are my dogs somewhere.
Hey,
It was published in Mexico. This is the Ediciones B edition. I have a special connection with Mexico whenever I visit and with the people there, and did very well there. And then last year I published The Clairvoyant of Calle Ocho. And this was published by Kensington and in Spanish by Penguin Random House here and in Mexico. So that's it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've done the audiobooks too. I loved it. I loved doing the Heartbreak Pill. Loved hearing my voice interpreting because I'd always heard the voices in my head. Yeah, so being able to read it as I would want it to be read was so thrilling. I loved it. Yeah.
And you know, being that you're also in the entertainment industry, television and all that, I'm sure you see pieces of your work also up on the stage or in front of the camera. So how does that impact you?
Yeah, well, you know, and not as much as I would like, because usually what I do with television, I'm a producer. I've been a producer. Recently, my project was digital, was launching an entire digital unit, you will say business unit for the Telemundo local stations. And that was thrilling. It was 15 stations, you know, a huge team of people. It was really great. But it's always communication, you know, whether it's TV or a magazine or writing for Vogue or for NPR or for, you know, or talking to students at Seton Hall or whatever it is that I'm doing. I see it all as just telling stories. It really is just telling stories, just figuring out what's the best way, the best channel, the best little pieces of the puzzle to put into telling that story the best way that it can be told. And that's how I see it. You know, just I will look at something, whether it's a show I'm producing or a novel I'm writing or a talk I'm giving, and just say, okay, who am I talking to and what's the best way for me to get this message across, and especially what am I trying to say, right? Right. So
I understand you have a common theme in a lot of your work, and the heartbreak issue. Right?
Oh yeah, it's what heartbreak. You know, I think it's how I look at the world. You know, I recently I was teaching at the Center for Literature here in Miami. And this student comes up to me after, and she tells me about this thing she wanted to write about. And since she went to do a polar cup, she you know how they dunk people in the polar, they dunk themselves into the icy waters.
Oh yeah, like right? in Russia where they go
in other countries, you know, people go to this space and they will dunk. And she was telling me all about her experience, you know, how she went into the water, how she felt like her heart had stopped when she went into the icy water and all of that. But all I could think of was, in the telling of the story, she had mentioned that her boyfriend had been the one to encourage her to go, had made many sacrifices to go there, but that when she plunged, he stood at the edge of the icy border into the water, looking afraid and not being able to jump. And he left without jumping. And she had mentioned that in passing, sort of like, oh yeah, you know, he stayed there and I went in. And for me, you know, if this were a story, he would be the protagonist, right? He'd be, you know, I was thinking of the heartbreak of fear, you know, how his heart must have felt that he was there and he couldn't do it. He just could not do it. Everybody else was there. He was losing face, I'm guessing, with his girlfriend, and he couldn't do it. So my mind just goes to that. It just goes to, who's heartbroken here? You know, I'll go into a room and, you know, who's in pain?
Oh, who's not heartbroken here?
Exactly. Well, yeah, that too. You know, today, for example, you know, every September 11, it's my sister's birthday, but all I can think of was being in that control room on September 11, producing and looking at these things again and again and again until, you know, you thought you were going crazy, right? So, yeah, my mind just goes to the heartbreak of things. So I've stopped fighting it.
Do you feel everything you're writing? Do you go, if you're writing something very intense, do you go through that emotion yourself?
Yeah, I do. And, you know, it's kind of kept me from telling real stories because I don't know if, as a reader, right, I tended not to go towards war stories, for example, because it wasn't a space I wanted to inhabit. And I think the reader picks a novel for the value of what's written, but also because they're going to live, especially a novel, not a short story, but a novel, you live with it for 2, 3 weeks, a month, however long it takes you to get through it, right? And you want to inhabit a space that has the questions you want answered in a way. So I think that that I never went there because I didn't want to, I didn't want more pain. I would write about, and my novels were more about identity, the issues of identity, and, modern issues, work, love. I never went into illness or abuse or war. But that's been changing, as my heart has been getting stronger and I've written out the lighter stories, I guess you would call them. It's beginning to say, okay, you're strong enough, you can get into it. And recently, I was a judge for the Flannery O'Connor Short Fiction Award, which I was thrilled to do. And I read over 100 short story collections.
Wow.
Yeah, in 3.5 months. So it was bliss. I was reading all day. And guess what? One of the stories that I chose, you have to narrow it down to 10. And each judge, there's 4 judges, and we each narrow it to 10. And out of the 40 that were narrowed down, they chose one of mine to be a winner. And it was called, I don't want to say the title because I don't know if they've announced it, but it has to do with war. It has to do with what happens after, the private wars that we all carry after the real famous political wars, take place. So I think I'm getting there. I'm getting to where I'm managing the heartbreak, and hopefully I'll be able to get into deeper topics as I move on.
We don't normally, persons that are not writers, normally we don't recognize the anguish that people go through to write.
Okay.
I'm not talking about the task of trying to get
yeah.
blocks. It's all the emotions that I can imagine are running through a person as you're trying to get it all sort of condensed into words.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. You living it, you having to think about, I can tell you when I was writing the Clairvoyant of Calle Ocho, I did not have widows. I did not know firsthand or had talked about the experience with somebody who had widowed. And within a little time after I finished writing the book, one of my very best friends lost her husband to cancer. And then within a year, my own daughter became a widow. And she spent those first few months with us, with my husband and I, in our home. And so, it was incredible to me how parallel the experience were. Here I was a year before researching widowhood, trying to figure out what does this feel like, trying to really get into the mind and thinking, how does this feel? What happens at dusk if dusk was when he came home and now he doesn't? And every dusk, the dusk comes, but he doesn't, or she doesn't. How does that feel, the finality of that? And it's just so staggering. And I could, I felt it as I wrote. And I thought about the little things, finding something that you thought you'd put away, and every little thing kind of assaulting you with a memory. So to me, it was just sort of putting myself in those shoes and trying to imagine a full day going with everything that normally happens, but being seen through that person's pain and heartbreak. And then a year later, seeing it played out in front of my eyes with somebody that I loved so much, it was amazing to me how the writing can mirror how you get so much into it that I think energy-wise, you sort of, get into that space.
I really think you have to have a very strong character to be able to handle so much pressure coming at so many sides. And then on top of that, you're on the writing for personal and then also for production. I mean, how do you handle so much?
I don't know. I think it actually helps you, I mean, I could be anywhere and never be bored if I have something to write or something to read, I could make a life in a room with just a little food and, and the conditions to read and write and think. I don't know. To me, it's actually, it's something that helps. It makes it easier on me, I think, than on the rest of other people who may not have tools to express what's going on in their lives creatively. I mean, we all go through stuff, right? And we all deal with it.
Life is life. We are all experiencing it in our own way. So absolutely. Then, like you said, as we're getting close to ending the show, I do want to ask you very specific question. There's a student out there, and it can be an adult, they have this inkering in their mind to pick up a pen and pencil and write. But the other half says, well, you're going to fail. No one's going to read it. People are going to criticize you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think all writers, we all go through that.
Right.
What's your advice to that person who's dabbling, like, should I or shouldn't I?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is just focus on giving one thing. Don't worry about whether, am I a writer? Am I going to be good enough? Is anybody going to publish this? Is anything ever going to come of this? Is this going to be a waste of time? Don't worry about any of that. Figure out that you're going to do one thing for the world. One thing, this story, this one story, this one thing right now, whether it's a novel or a short story or a poem, you're just going to do that. And just concentrate every day on thinking about it every day and being in it every day, putting a little bit. And you're going to have all this time you're going to feel really uncomfortable, like you don't know what you're doing and this is a mess. And that's okay, because that's where you live now. As when you write, you live in the mess. You don't know if this is good. You don't know what's going on. It doesn't make any sense. It's terrible. And you keep reading and you keep writing and you figure it out. And that's the fun. The fun is figuring it out, right? And then just giving this one thing to the world without worrying about what'll happen after. You'll worry plenty after, but when you're but when you're writing, just write, just say whatever is coming up, and then figure out how to arrange it. And that's all. I think that's what happens to a lot of people who are writers but are not writing, is, they are thinking about the after before they've created anything. And they just need to forget all that and just do it for the pleasure of doing it. And it'll happen. It'll just happen.
And then it becomes a habit of where you want to continue writing and writing.
The high when you get it, when you've been working with this paragraph to say all these things and it's all awkward and clumsy and horrible, and then you read it and you don't even think you wrote it. You said, oh wow, this is actually not that bad, right? The day after, like, who wrote this? That is so amazing that just that will carry you through, and you will never be able to stop doing it. It's horrible. I always say to people when they tell me that, they want to write, I say, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, because they're in for it. But
a wonderful curse.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, like Detective Monk will say, one of my favorite shows. It's a gift and a curse.
Two last things, please.
Yeah.
Contact information where our viewers can get a hold and learn more about your books, your blogging, whatever information. And number two, can you highlight us for your little dog? I keep seeing the nose.
I have to pick her up, because if not, she wouldn't have let us finish. This is Annie.
That's all right.
This is Annie, and we've had her now for 6
Oh, there she is. There's a dash out.
You can't see her. Let me just. Hey, Annie, say hello. Hey, lady. Yeah, I have 2 of them. I love dogs. I love dogs. So I always have 1 or 2. So where can they find me? They can find me everywhere. I'm so public, it's a little embarrassing. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, just Anjanette Delgado, and they'll find me. It may be easier because of the spelling of my name through the titles of the books, The Heartbreak Pill, and then they'll find me anyway. And also I have my own website where you can see where I'm, my events and the classes and also the books. And that's, AnjanetteDelgado.com.
Do you travel out here to the West Coast, or are you strictly?
I do. I'm set to be in San Francisco soon, and I go to LA quite often. I love that city, and sometimes a little bit to Arizona for Hispanic conferences. So yeah.
Great. Well, we'll be looking for you everywhere and following you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank again wonderful author, Anjanette Delgado, who is coming to us from Miami. Thank you for giving us your time, because I know you're extremely busy.
Oh, no, thank you.
Those are pearls of wisdom that every student, it doesn't have to be a student. I keep saying that word. I keep saying a person who's got a story in their head, you got to put it out there. And you know what? One thing I hate is people who carry around a red pen and are ready to criticize it, but I ask them, well, what have you written? And they say, well, I haven't written anything. You know what? I don't want you to look at it. I read it, but I don't. So I want to thank you for those pearls of wisdom, and I think the students will appreciate it as well. So thank you very much.
And I look
forward to having you in future shows en español, y éxito en todo lo que sigas haciendo.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Un abrazo.
Ciao, and bye to you, Bob.
Ciao, ciao.
Adios.